Hurricane Matthew is the latest in a long line of storms that have had an impact on the U.S. presidency. In August of 1992, Hurricane Andrew slammed into the Florida coast, causing nearly $27 billion in damage. Soon after, President George H.W. Bush toured the impacted region, but was criticized by some for reacting too slowly with federal aid. Days later, his Democratic opponent Bill Clinton also surveyed the scene and said the federal government's delayed reaction should be looked into. Despite the criticism, a New York Times CBS News poll showed 61% of Florida voters approved of Bush's handling of that disaster. 13 years later, Bush's son, President George W. Bush, would not be judged as kindly for his handling of a similar natural disaster. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina ravaged the Gulf Coast, and the Bush administration's response was widely criticized throughout the country. 54% of Americans disapproved of Bush's handling of the crisis, and his approval rating dropped to a new low of 42%. Bush would later call his infamous flyover of New Orleans days after the crisis a huge mistake. Years later, yet another hurricane would impact U.S. politics. Days before the 2012 presidential election, Hurricane Sandy made landfall in the Northeast, causing unprecedented damage in the region. Many supporters of Republican nominee Mitt Romney were irked when New Jersey Governor Chris Christie warmly greeted President Barack Obama upon his arrival to survey the damage. Christie was asked about the encounter as recently as February of this year, responding in part, "I didn't hug him."
Sam, that story was always silly to me. The idea that the governor of New Jersey wouldn't accept federal help from the president of the United States and shake his hand and stand with him as his state was underwater.
And heck hug him.
It was absurd. Obviously, you have to. There are lives at stake, right? And for Christie to solely operate out of political scheming was never going to make sense. But to dismiss the politics of it also doesn't make sense either. I remember talking to Stu Stevens, Mitt Romney's chief strategist for 2012, and he said to me that he thought that the response that Obama had to Hurricane Sandy essentially paused all the momentum that Mitt Romney had going into the closing weeks of the election and effectively guaranteed the victory. Now, he's not saying that if Sandy never happened, Mitt Romney would have won, but the optics of the president being there, acting presidential, and there's nothing Mitt Romney could actually do. If you recall, he tried to have a charity drive. He tried to get money donated to the victims, but it all seemed fairly mundane and trivial next to President Obama. So these things do end up mattering.